What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors comes face to face with a late-night host who clearly didn't do his homework? The answer: absolute television mayhem. Unscripted, unfiltered, and unforgettable. Mark Wahlberg, known for his no-nonsense attitude and working-class Boston roots, was supposed to have a standard, low-stakes promotional spot on The Tonight Show, but what unfolded was one of the most uncomfortable and explosive interviews in late-night history, ending with Wahlberg storming off the set as the studio audience sat frozen in disbelief. If you want to see how fast things can spiral from casual banter to absolute disaster, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your thoughts on this jaw-dropping moment. Trust me, you won't want to miss what went down. The night began like any other taping of The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. The audience buzzed with anticipation, the band ran through their warm-up set, and the production crew made final checks. Everything pointed to a smooth, predictable episode. Wahlberg was the marquee guest, set to promote his latest action-packed thriller, a film he'd poured years of passion into. It marked a return to the genre that launched him to stardom, and he was genuinely excited to share behind-the-scenes stories and connect with fans. Backstage, Wahlberg appeared calm and composed as he completed the usual pre-show routine with producers. He'd been on Fallon's show plenty of times before. While the two weren't exactly close, their past interactions had been polite and professional. Wahlberg understood the drill: entertain the audience, plug the project, maybe share a few laughs. That was the deal. But Fallon had a different plan. As the show kicked off, everything seemed routine. Fallon opened with his trademark monologue: topical jokes, breezy delivery, and just the right amount of charm. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Fallon's energy was high as he introduced his guest. "Mark Wahlberg, everybody?" he beamed. The crowd erupted in applause as Wahlberg walked out, smiling and waving, settling into his chair like a seasoned pro. "Great to have you back, man. You look fantastic." "Thanks for having me." "Jimmy," Wahlberg replied, casually adjusting in his seat. "Always good to be here." "So let's talk about this new movie," Fallon said, holding up the poster. "Looks intense, lots of action." But then, without warning, he shifted gears. "Before we get into that," Fallon said, "I've got to ask you about something that's been all over social media." Wahlberg's expression changed. This wasn't how their interviews usually started. The tone felt off. "What's that?" "There's been some criticism about your past," Fallon continued. "Some of the things you did growing up in Boston. A lot of people are saying maybe it's time you addressed those incidents more directly, especially now that you've reached this level of success." The audience went quiet. This wasn't the fun promo segment they'd expected. Wahlberg's posture stiffened, his jaw clenched slightly. "Jimmy, I've addressed those issues many times over the years," he said evenly, but firmly. "I've taken responsibility for the things I did as a kid. I've apologized. I've tried to do better with my platform. But that's not what I'm here to talk about tonight." Fallon didn't let it go. "But don't you think, with everything happening in society, that maybe just saying sorry isn't enough? Actions have consequences, right?" The tension in the room was unmistakable. Audience members shifted in their seats. Wahlberg's publicist, watching from the wings, looked alarmed. This wasn't what they'd agreed to. "Listen, Jimmy," Wahlberg said, his Boston accent thickening with each word. "I don't know what kind of show you're trying to run here, but this isn't what we discussed. We're supposed to be talking about the movie, not rehashing stuff from 30 years ago that I've already owned up to. I'm just asking the questions I think the audience wants answered." Fallon replied, his usual grin gone, replaced with something more confrontational. "Isn't that what good journalism is about?" Wahlberg laughed in disbelief. "Good journalism? Since when is The Tonight Show about journalism? You play games with celebrities and read tweets. This is entertainment, not an ambush. The exchange was intensifying fast. Neither man was backing down. Fallon kept pushing, while Wahlberg grew increasingly angry, feeling blindsided by a host he thought he could trust. "I think our audience is smart enough to handle real conversations," Fallon pressed. "Maybe the problem is you're just not comfortable being held accountable." That hit Wahlberg hard. His eyes lit up with fury. The air in the studio thickened. "Held accountable?" Wahlberg repeated, his voice rising. "Who made you the accountability police, Jimmy? You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about how you and your producers promised me a straightforward promo interview. Let's talk about how you're ambushing a guest who came here in good faith to support your show." The room was dead silent. Cameras still rolling. Fallon looked rattled. Wahlberg wasn't finished. "I'm not here for your clickbait. I'm here to talk about the work. And if that's not what this is, then I'm out." Without another word, Wahlberg stood up, ripped off his mic, and walked off the set. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Fallon sat frozen, unsure of what to say. What was meant to be a routine appearance had turned into a late-night disaster, one that would dominate headlines and spark a fiery debate about the line between journalism, entertainment, and respect. This wasn't the usual playful back and forth that Tonight Show audiences had come to expect. What was unfolding now was a raw, unscripted clash between two strong-willed men, live under the bright lights, with hundreds watching in the studio and millions more tuned in at home. And then came the moment that truly sent shockwaves through the room. Rather than de-escalate or acknowledge how far off script things had gone, Fallon did something no one expected. He doubled down, with a smugness that felt entirely foreign to his usual goofy charm. He leaned forward and delivered the line that changed everything. "Mark, you're getting pretty defensive for someone who claims he's got nothing to hide," Fallon said, his voice laced with condescension. "Maybe the truth is, you're just not used to being challenged. Everyone in Hollywood just kisses your feet these days." The audience gasped. Audible, genuine gasps. Several front-row faces turned from smiling to stunned. This wasn't the affable Fallon they'd come to know. This was something else. Someone deliberately trying to provoke. Wahlberg didn't speak right away. His face cycled through disbelief, irritation, and something colder, pity. And when he finally did respond, his voice came low, firm, and cutting. "You know what, Jimmy? I've been doing this for over 25 years. I've sat across from real journalists, tough interviewers, people who ask hard questions with respect, with integrity. What you're doing, this isn't journalism. It's not entertainment. It's cheap, real cheap." Fallon let out a bitter laugh, sharp, humorless. "I think what's cheap is coming on a show and expecting softball questions while you plug your movie." He shot back. "The days of celebrity worship are over." Mark Wahlberg's jaw clenched. The mask slipped. His voice rose. Controlled, but unmistakably fueled by anger. "Celebrity worship," he repeated. "I never asked for worship, Jimmy. I asked for basic respect. And the interview format your producers promised. You want to play journalist? Fine. But don't lie to my team. Don't blindside your guests. And don't pretend this is about accountability when it's just you trying to make yourself look relevant." The band, normally quick with a witty cue or awkward fill, sat frozen. No music, no smiles. The tension had swallowed the room whole. Cameras kept rolling. But behind them, you could see the crew, some exchanging nervous glances, others just staring, wide-eyed. Everyone knew this wasn't just a bit gone wrong. This was real. Then Fallon made his worst mistake yet. With a theatrical shrug, he turned to the audience and said, "Well, folks, I guess we're seeing the real Mark Wahlberg tonight. Not the polished movie star. The guy who can't handle a few tough questions." Silence. No laughter. No applause. Just confusion and discomfort rippling across the audience. A few people glanced at each other, visibly unsettled. Fallon had misread the room. Badly. Wahlberg stared at him, unblinking. When he spoke, it was low and loaded with restrained fury. You just made a huge mistake, Jimmy. You don't know me. You don't know my story. And you clearly don't know what professionalism means. I came here to talk about a film a lot of people worked hard on. I came to support your show. Instead, you turned this into some kind of personal ambush. For what? Clicks. Fallon tried to interject. Look, if you can't handle the heat. But Wahlberg cut him off cold. Handle the heat, he echoed, his voice rising. You think this is heat? This is just lazy, unprofessional garbage. Real heat comes from real conversations, from real journalists. What you're doing is playground nonsense dressed up to look like hard, hitting talk. You could feel it in the air now, static, electric, tense. Audience members began pulling out their phones. They knew. This moment was going to be everywhere by morning. And Fallon? He looked stunned, rattled. But instead of regrouping or apologizing, he made another critical misstep, one that sealed the moment as a late-night meltdown for the ages. Maybe the problem is, Fallon sneered, you're not as tough as you pretend to be in your movies. All that Boston tough guy stuff. Just an act, right? That comment was a direct hit on a line Wahlberg clearly considered sacred. His entire demeanor changed. He leaned forward, eyes locked on Fallon with a stare that stripped away every ounce of late-night artifice. You want to question my toughness, Wahlberg said, voice low and steady. Let me tell you something about tough, Jimmy. Tough is growing up with nothing in Dorchester and clawing your way out without forgetting where you came from. Tough is owning your mistakes, publicly, and working every day to be better than the person you were. Tough isn't sitting in a cushy studio chair, lobbing cheap shots at guests who showed up in good faith. The balance of power in the room flipped in an instant. Wahlberg's fury wasn't performative. It was lived in, earned, undeniable. Fallon, on the other hand, suddenly looked exactly like what he was. A talk show host who'd pushed too far, misjudged his guest, and now found himself cornered by his own arrogance. I think you're taking this way too seriously, Fallon said, but the edge had drained from his voice. The swagger was gone. It's just television, Mark. We're just having a conversation. Wahlberg blinked, then repeated incredulously, just television. He sat back, shook his head once, and leaned in again. You think that gives you the right to ambush people? You think just television makes it okay to lie to someone's team, then come out here and blindside them on camera? This isn't just TV to me, Jimmy. This is my name, my work, my life. And you decided that was fair game for a segment. The audience sat in total silence now. The air had thickened. Some were frozen in disbelief. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure whether they were witnessing television history or a train wreck. Fallon attempted to course correct. Maybe we should just agree to disagree, he offered, reaching for his cue cards. Let's move on. Talk about your movie. I think we've both made our points. Wahlberg stared at him, long, cold, unimpressed. Move on, he echoed. You think you can just flip a switch and pretend this didn't happen? You think you can question a man's character on live TV, and when it blows up in your face, say, let's move on? That's not how any of this works, Jimmy. The silence that followed was so deep. The studio hum and camera motors were suddenly audible. Fallon didn't move. His usual bounce and gestures were gone. He looked stunned, like a man just realizing he'd walked into traffic with his eyes closed. Mark, I think you're overreacting, Fallon said quietly. But even he didn't seem convinced. It's live TV. Things get heated. That's part of what makes it interesting. Wahlberg let out a humorless laugh. Short, sharp, interesting. You think trying to humiliate someone on national television is interesting. You think lying to your guest and trapping them for views makes good content. The band sat still. The cameras rolled, uncertain. Crew members were looking offstage, waiting for a signal to cut. But nobody could look away. Fallon tried one last time to salvage it. Look, I'm sorry if you feel like I crossed a line, he said. But even he knew how hollow it sounded. Maybe we both got a little carried away. Let's reset. We can talk about the movie. Have some fun." Wahlberg stared at him with a look that blended disgust and disbelief. "Start over," he said, as if the words were poison. "You spent the last 10 minutes trying to drag me through the mud in front of a national audience. And now you want a do-over." People in the crowd were now filming with their phones. Others just sat there, completely riveted. This was no longer a segment. This was a reckoning. "I wasn't trying to humiliate you," Fallon said, voice barely above a whisper. "I was just trying to have a real conversation. People are so fake on these shows. I wanted something honest." "Honest." Wahlberg's voice was rising again. "Then let's be honest. Let's talk about how you called my publicist yesterday and said this would be a light, fun segment about my film. Let's talk about how your team promised no surprises, no politics, no digging into the past. Let's talk about how you looked me in the eye backstage and told me you were excited to hear about the work I've done." Fallon's face had gone pale. He kept glancing toward the wings, hoping maybe for someone to step in, but no one came. "Mark, you're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be." He muttered, "A bigger deal." Wahlberg's voice cracked, this time not with anger, but with something deeper. "Real hurt. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you thought you could trust? To be invited onto a show you've supported, only to be turned into target practice for your host's ego?" There was no coming back from that. The tone had shifted. The room wasn't just witnessing a feud. It was witnessing a fracture, a breaking point. "I wasn't trying to destroy you," Fallon said, his words weak and weightless. But Wahlberg just stared at him, silent now, as if the damage had already been done. And Fallon was the only one who hadn't noticed. Wahlberg let out a bitter laugh. "You call those questions," he said, his voice cold and hard. "You weren't asking anything, Jimmy. You were making accusations. You were trying to score points, using my past, things I've already owned, apologized for, learned from, and turning them into ammunition for your own agenda." By now, the confrontation had stretched over 15 agonizing minutes, far longer than any typical interview segment. Producers hovered behind the scenes in full crisis mode, but no one dared cut away. The moment was too raw, too magnetic to interrupt. Fallon made one last effort to pull the interview back from the edge. "Mark, I respect you, as an actor and as a person. I really do," he said, his tone suddenly softer, desperate. "Maybe I came at this the wrong way. I just wanted to try something different. To show a deeper side of these interviews." The Wahlberg's reply came low and simmering with fury. "You've got a funny way of showing respect," he said. Respect would have meant sticking to what you promised. Respect would have meant asking before blindsiding me with personal attacks on live television. Respect would have meant treating me like a person, not a prop. The studio was now so silent it was oppressive. The audience sat still, many of them visibly uncomfortable, trapped between fascination and secondhand shame. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Fallon offered. But the words were hollow the second they left his mouth. Wahlberg's eyes narrowed. "You're sorry I feel that way. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry I didn't just sit here and take it. You're sorry your little ambush didn't blow up the way you hoped." Fallon opened his mouth to respond, but Wahlberg raised a hand, sharply, firmly. "You know what? I'm done. I'm done with this interview. I'm done with this show. And I'm done with you." He stood slowly, deliberately, and the audience held its collective breath. Everyone had felt this moment building, but watching it actually unfold was still surreal. "Mark, wait," Fallon called after him, panic in his voice now. "Don't walk out. We can fix this. Let's talk about the movie. That's what people came to see." Wahlberg turned, glancing back with undisguised contempt. "Now you want to talk about the movie," he said. "After 15 minutes of trying to tear me down, now you want to be the host you should have been from the beginning." He shook his head. Too late, Jimmy. You made your choice the moment you turned this into a hit piece. The audience wants to hear about your film. Fallon pleaded. Wahlberg's voice was ice. No, Jimmy. They came here for a good time. You promised them entertainment. Instead, you gave them a smear job. You didn't disappoint me. You disappointed them. With steady hands, Wahlberg unclipped his microphone and placed it on the table. Every movement was composed, but the emotion behind it pulsed just beneath the surface. This is what happens when you forget there are real people behind the fame, he said, looking out into the studio. This is what happens when you mistake celebrity for target practice. When you confuse being a talk show host with being a journalist, and end up failing at both. Fallon, now visibly rattled, made one last attempt. Mark, please, he said, voice breaking slightly. Let's just finish the interview. We can start over. Talk about whatever you want. Wahlberg stared at him with something approaching pity. Jimmy, you still don't get it, do you? This isn't about finishing an interview. It's about integrity. About keeping your word. About treating people with basic decency. And tonight, you failed on all counts. Then, without another word, Wahlberg turned and walked off stage, his footsteps echoing across the silent studio floor. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They simply watched, stunned, as one of Hollywood's most respected actors disappeared behind the curtain, leaving behind a host frozen in his chair, staring into the middle distance like a man who had just realized the cost of his choices. At the edge of the stage, Wahlberg paused one final time. He looked back at Fallon, deflated, silent, and delivered the final blow. You know what's really sad, Jimmy? I actually used to respect you. I thought you were one of the good ones. I thought you knew that entertainment didn't have to come at the cost of someone's dignity. I guess I was wrong. And with that, he was gone. The cameras lingered on Fallon's face, a portrait of stunned regret and unmistakable defeat, before finally, mercifully, the show cut to commercial. It was one of the most explosive, uncomfortable, and unforgettable interviews ever aired on late-night television. So, what do you think? Was Mark Wahlberg right to walk off? Or should he have stayed and tried to power through? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the moments when Hollywood's biggest stars finally say, enough. Because in this business, the breaking point isn't just real, it's inevitable.